Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the fifth in our series of Performance Puzzle webinars. I'm Gary Cookson, and I'm your host for today, and I'm going to take you through the next 20-25 minutes or so talking about employer brand and the impact that that has on unlocking the performance puzzle. So I mentioned before who I am. If you've not come across me before, if you've not listened to any of these before, then this is me. I find it easier to describe my life in pictures rather than words. And if you stalk me on social media, this is what you see. You see that I work with MOL as an associate tutor on their CIPD programs, but also run my own business and do a range of different things. You'll see I've got a young and growing family. And in fact, since we started these webinars and did these slides, I've added a fourth child to the pictures below as if three weren't enough. And you'll see that I'm quite sporty and active, and that often comes out in some of the things that I talk about in terms of well-being and so on. So let's get going. Doing this today on behalf of MOL. If you've not come across MOL before, there's information on screen. There's also handouts available in one of the panels for you to take away information about some of the courses that MOL do and how they're structured and organized and so on. And if you want to know more about MOL, the best place to go to find out about the group that MOL is part of, the LTE group, is their website. So there's information on there as well. And we're doing the performance puzzle today. And normally, if you've not come across these before, they last about 20 minutes in terms of my content, but then there's time for questions after that. We interact with a number of different ways. On the GoToWebinar panels, you'll see the chat panel, which we can use. Feel free to give me reactions, comments, questions through there. You've also got the questions panel, and we can use that for the same purpose as well. I'm going to be using a couple of polls today. In fact, I've got 3 for us to do, sprinkled throughout the 20 minutes of my content. And you can tweet your views using the performance puzzle hashtag. So there's a range of different ways to interact with us today. The sessions are obviously being recorded. If you missed any of the previous 4, then you can access those through getting in touch with MOL Learn. And this one will be recorded and the broadcast shared at a later date. And the performance puzzle is 12 webinars, 1 a month. And this is number 5 about employer brand. The other 4 have been quite well attended. This one being August, not quite so well attended. I think most people are on holiday. I was on holiday last week, so it's nice to be back. Well, I say nice, it isn't really. I'd rather still be on holiday, but here we are. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, I've got 2 main objectives for you today. I'm going to be covering 2 things. Firstly, we're going to have a look at why organizations need a really well-defined employer brand and some of the component parts of that. And then we're going to link from that into how you use your employer brand to build your employee engagement and therefore enhance the employee experience and get better performance from your employees. So that's what we're going to cover over the next 20 minutes. And it is just scratching the surface, as many of these performance puzzles are. And if you want more information, then by all means get in touch with MOL Learn and through them to me, and we can share more information with you. So that's what we're doing. Let's get going. Firstly, let's start thinking about what employer brand actually is. It can be about talent attraction, can be about retaining that talent. Often it's about both. And sometimes it differs from the customer facing brand as well. And I don't know whether that matters, and I'd be interested in your views as to whether it's important for the employer brand and the customer brand to be in sync and aligned. And maybe you can give examples of companies where that is or isn't the case. I'm not sure it matters massively. I think if you look at companies like Google, Virgin Group, you can see that it runs through what they do like a stick of rock. Both their employer brand and their customer brand are the same. But you can have a look at some companies like, say, Amazon or Sports Direct, where their employer brand and their customer brand are quite different and distinct, and the experiences that customers and employees have in those companies can be quite different. And yet all of the companies that I've mentioned there have some element of competitive advantage, are doing well as organizations judged by their own criteria. So I wonder whether having your brands in alignment really matters that much. I'm not so certain about that. I think what I am certain about is you need to know what your employer brand really is, and to make sure you understand what it says about your organization. Branding is partly what you want others to know and say about your organization, but mostly it's about what they do know about your organization and what they do say, whether you want them to or not. So there's a limit to how much control you can have over this. And many people would say, if you can't control what people are saying about your employer brand, should you even bother trying? And I think the answer to that is yes. So we're going to explore this more today because it affects both talent attraction and talent retention. I'm going to launch a poll for us in a second. And the poll question is going to be this. It's about whether you have in your organization a fairly well-defined employer brand. So I'm going to launch this poll for you imminently, and that should be available to you on screen at the moment. 4 different options. Yes, it's distinct from the customer brand. Yes, it's at odds with, different to the customer brand. No, the managed as one. And no, frankly, haven't got a clue what you're talking about. So give us your views on this poll. And as we're collecting the responses, I'll share a couple of views on my own, and I'll close the poll in a minute when everybody's had a chance to give their views. The CIPD say that all organizations have an employer brand, whether you consciously seek to develop one or not. And the brand is based on the way they're perceived as a place to work. So, for example, by potential recruits, but also by current employees and by people who have left the organization. So there's 3 different stages to your employer brand that need to be considered here. For people who might work for your organization, people who do work for your organization, and people who used to work for your organization. So I'm going to close this poll now because everybody's voted, and I'm going to share the results for you. So the results should be showing on screen, and you can see a mainly even split between the first 3 options there. Most people say they've got a distinct but complementary employer brand, and that's really good. It's really good. There's a few people are saying that there is a good employer brand in place in their organization, but it's something completely different and perhaps at odds with their customer brand, and that's something akin to how Amazon or Sports Direct might view themselves. Lots of people saying that they manage it as one, and there are lots of good advantages to doing that. Google do that, Virgin Group do that, and there's lots of other organizations too. And a few people, very honestly, admitting that they haven't got a clue what I'm on about. Well, stick with us over the next 15 minutes, and hopefully by the end of that, you might have more of a clue. So close that one down for you, and we'll move on and look at the next bit here. What I'm sharing with you here today is some findings from an American survey, but I think one that applies to the UK too. And by all means, share your views in chat or in the questions panel as you see some of the things come up here. This was by Hudson HRO Today magazine fairly recently. And it says there are these 7 things that organizations who've got a really good, well-defined employer brand are likely to have these 7 things in place. And you might want to very quickly scan these to have a look at your own approach to this in your organizations. If you feel you've got a good employer brand, have you got these 7 things in place? And if one or more of them is missing, which is that? Do you want to tell us in chat and tell us why you think that's missing, and maybe what you might be able to do about it? And that might be something that is more a rhetorical question for you to take away afterwards. Going back to the CIPD research, they say that to be effective, your employer brand should be evident to anybody at any stage of the recruitment process and should help you frame your approach to people management, because it should help you to understand how you need to do your induction, performance management, reward, internal comms, what the leadership behaviors should be like, and how you treat people who are leaving or have left the organization. And it shouldn't be rhetoric that just says what the organization's values are, and I've seen that happen so many times, but it should be reflective of the employee experience itself. And the CIPD point out that people who like the job they do and who like the place they work at become advocates for that place. So they become engaged and they spread that engagement to other people. I'm going to launch another poll for us and just take this in a slightly different direction. I want to just have a look at how you are currently managing your employer brand, and there's a range of different options here. So if you haven't got one, then obviously your answer is going to be none of the above, but have a look at the different options here. How are you managing your employer brand? Are you doing it on Glassdoor, Indeed, LinkedIn, Twitter or Facebook, or something else? And if it's something else, then pop that in the chat panel or a questions panel. And I'm interested to see where people are doing this, because your employer brand, whether you like it or not, exists on all of these platforms, every single one, because at some point your organization, unless you're exceptionally lucky, will have been mentioned by an employee, by a customer, by an ex-employee, and you might not know about it. So your employer brand is on all of these platforms, whether you like it or not. And it might be outside of your control. And that might be something you're comfortable with, and it might be something that scares the willies out of you. And if it scares you, then you need to do something about it. So I'm just collecting the last couple of responses, and then I'll close the poll and share with you what's coming through here. And it's an interesting split that I can see at the moment. Hopefully those people who are ticking other are telling us what that might be. So I'm going to look through the chat panel in a second, or the questions panel, and see what people are popping in there. So I'm going to close this poll because almost everybody has voted now, and share with you the responses. And you can see here that half of the organizations are managing it on what we would call the main social media sites, Facebook and Twitter. And I'm wondering whether that's a separate employer page, or whether that's part of the main organizational brand on those social media platforms. Pros and cons of both approaches. So interesting to see what that is. LinkedIn featuring in heavily as well, but very few organizations using Glassdoor and Indeed. And I find that surprising, because many organizations really need to review what people are saying about them on Glassdoor and Indeed. And you might be lucky that nothing's being said about your organization on these platforms. But I think that's a double-edged sword in and of itself. If there's nothing being said about your employer brand, well, what implications does that have about the organization that you are, and what does that tell people who might want to work for you? So interesting points there. I'm going to hide this poll and move on and share with you some examples of good employer brands that you might want to research. You can have a look at companies like Heineken, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Zappos, Singapore Airlines, Cisco, and GE. Now, they're all big multinational corporations, and by all means, have a look at those, research what they're doing, see the good bits, see the bits that you might be able to adapt and adopt for your organization. But those organizations are doing it really well. And what their branding allows their job applicants to do is effectively due diligence. And it's the same with your own employer brand. No matter what platform you're managing it or not managing it on, people are doing due diligence. They're deciding whether or not they'd like to work for your organization. And sometimes they'll make that choice as part of the recruitment process, as they're going through the application form or the interview. But if you've got a really good employer brand, you can do that before they've even decided to apply, before there's even a vacancy that exists. And that's what Glassdoor call the concept of the informed candidate. So it's a useful thing to do, put as much out there to enable people to know whether they want to work for you or not before a vacancy exists. And a clear and public employer brand allows transparency, and that enables you to attract a greater quality of candidate, because people who don't want to work for you because they don't like what they see or hear or read won't even bother applying, and that avoids wasting lots of people's time. So the informed candidate is likely to go through your whole recruitment process already engaged, and go through your onboarding and induction process already engaged, because there's enough information out there to convince them it's a good place to work. And sites like Glassdoor and Indeed tell you what other people like you think about a company, not what the company thinks about itself. And that's how it differs from the company pages on Facebook and Twitter and the company's website. And it's what matters to people. So how often do you go with what people say on TripAdvisor about a restaurant or a place to visit or a holiday? It's exactly the same principle. People will do the research about what other people like them are saying about the organization. And they're doing it whether you like them to or not. And sometimes you'll get negative comments. And in fact, it's very likely you will. So I wonder how you deal with negative comments. If people have been dealing with negative comments on things like Glassdoor, Twitter, or even Facebook and so on, tell us how you've been dealing with them. I think there are 4 things that I would say that help in dealing with negative comments. One is to acknowledge them. Just don't ignore them, just acknowledge them. A simple response, thank you for getting in touch, something like that, and then build on that. Secondly, I would take it out of the public view. I'm a big complainer at companies, and I complain lots. It's a character flaw of mine, but I will often do it on social media. And the number of companies that take it onto a DM or a private message simply to get it out of public view, and it's a good thing to do. So the initial response is there, but the subsequent follow-up and the resolution is sometimes hidden from view, and that's a good thing to do. Resolving it is another good thing to do. That's your 3rd thing. And then the 4th thing is showing that you resolve things. So making the resolution a little bit more public as much as you're able to in terms of respecting people's privacy and so on. But ultimately, I would say about negative comments, take the rough with the smooth. Just accept that it's people's reaction to how you are treating them as an employee, how you're treating them as an applicant, and how you're treating them as an alumnus, somebody who used to work for your organization. And just accept that if you're doing things right, then the majority of the comments are going to be positive ones. But if you're doing things wrong, then they ain't going to be positive. So I've got another poll to share with us now, and the question's going to be this one. Oh, sorry. It's going to be about what's stopping you developing your employer brand. So a couple of things there that you might want to pick up on. So the first one, let's launch it and have a look at this. So this is launching now for you. What's stopping you developing an even better employer brand at the moment? Could it be you don't know how? Could it be that it's a resource issue? Could it be you don't see you've got a problem? Could it be you're scared of the negative reactions, and could it be something else? So by all means, tell us in chat or in the questions panel. Some interesting stuff. And by all means, give us your reactions here. And I'll just let this poll run for another 10 seconds or so, give the last couple of people a chance to share their views. Just got 2 more people ready to vote. And I'm going to close it in 5 seconds. And a very interesting split here. Okay, so I'm closing that now, and I'll share the results here. So look at these results here. Half of us are saying it's a resource issue. Half of us saying it's a resource issue. Whether it's time or money or something else, it's not defined any further than that. But it doesn't need to be a resource issue. This is something that should be led from the top. It should be something that the organization sees as contributing directly to the bottom line, and therefore it should something that senior executives should care quite a lot about. But a few people saying as well, it's about not knowing how to do it. I think that's a bigger problem, something that you might want to look at. And there's ways in which you can start to use your employees to help you define it. I'm going to come on to that in a second. Few people admitting they haven't got a problem in the first place. That's great to hear. And a few people scared of negative reactions, which you hope I've tried to allay a little bit. Just let them happen and respond to them. So, and a few people saying something else. So by all means, tell us in chat or questions or tweet your views there. I'm going to hide that poll now and go on to the next slide. I think you can use your staff to develop your brand. And in fact, you have to. It's the only real way to do it. You can bring in an external consultancy to help facilitate the process, but your people know the organization best. And by helping them or getting them to help you develop the brand, you will increase their engagement because you will give them a more positive experience. So how does this work? Some ideas that I've got to share with you here. You could get current employees to review the company. That'd be a really good thing to do, getting them to review it on Glassdoor, on Indeed, or on anything else you like, Facebook perhaps, or Twitter. Get your current employees to rate the CEO. That's a feature that Glassdoor has. It's a scary thing if you're a CEO, I've no doubt, but it's a way of getting your employees engaged with feedback. You could get your current employees to give you their thoughts on different aspects of what you already have out there. So get them to review your Facebook page, get them to review your LinkedIn page, get them to review comments that are there on Glassdoor or your website. You can include employer branding as a section in whatever employee feedback mechanisms you have. That might be a survey, it might be something else, but act on that feedback that's given by the employees about the brand. Show that you are listening to them and using their ideas, and they will get more engaged because of that. In fact, you could get them to create the employer branding material, actively involving your employees in defining the brand and managing it. Not only engages the people who are involved, but it flushes out those people who aren't engaged. And I think what I'd say is how you treat your own employees and your past employees has a direct impact on the brand, and vice versa. They're all ambassadors. They're all talking about you as an employer. So if you give them the right kind of experience, they're going to say nice things about you. If you give them the wrong kind of experience, they won't, or they might even say bad things. If you give them a chance to make the company more attractive, many of your employees will take that chance, and it will enhance your brand as a result. They'll become more engaged and they'll spread that virally through the organization. So it's a really helpful thing to do. So my final thoughts before I start to take some questions then. It matters. It really matters for getting the right people into your organization, but also treating them right once they're there. I do think you get out what you put in. If you're not putting much effort into it, you're not going to get the return you need. If you put in loads of effort into it, whether that's time or money or just attention, then you'll get that back. But your biggest advocates are your own employees. They are your employer brand. It's not to do with a flashy website. It's not to do with loads of positive comments on Indeed or Glassdoor or a shiny Facebook page. It's about your employees, how you treat them. They become your employer brand. Give them the input, give them the recognition, they'll become engaged. And it's all, again, about treating employees as adults and unlocking the next piece of the performance puzzle. That's the end of my content today. I'm going to go through the questions panel and just see if there's anything on there that might be worth picking up on. And by all means, keep adding to the questions here. People are using the questions panel for comments as well, so I can see some of the comments coming through. People are saying which social media platforms they're using, other ways of managing their employer brand, so through professional trades, journals and so on in the industry. People saying it's a challenge because the branding is often done by the marketing and comms team, and I think you need to make sure the HR team are heavily involved in this. They're the people who create and shape the employee experience. They ought to know these things best. Somebody's saying that their leadership team are the blockers. Well, that's an interesting point. And has anybody held a mirror up to the leadership team and shown them the impact of the behavior that they're having there? And another person saying that they don't really have a problem. And that's great to hear. But it also means that they don't spot negative reactions and negative comments. So some interesting comments coming through there in the questions panel, and by all means keep these coming through. And if there's any further questions that anybody wants to ask, then you could always contact MOL Learn or myself on Twitter afterwards and have a conversation with us there. I'm more than happy to continue the conversation with you. But hopefully you found this interesting today. Employer brand is something that's really undervalued sometimes in an organization, but it's something that we in HR can have a massive impact on, and it hits loads of different areas. So hopefully there's plenty that you can take away from today. I think there's one further question No further questions come through that I've seen in the questions panel, nothing else in chat, but by all means talk to us after the event. That's it for today, folks. Hopefully I'll see you at the next performance puzzle in a month's time, but feel free to log off whenever's convenient for you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.